Good afternoon, everyone. See a lot of people still joining, so wait another minute or so. We know how many registrants we have, and people are kind of coming on rapidly, so we'll wait one more minute and then go ahead and get started. All right, everyone. I guess it's time to get started. We still have some people joining us, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we use the entire allotted time for this webinar. So what we're going to be doing today is kind of talking on the same format that we did last week, same format that we'll use next week for the Cupid's Q&A as well. A little bit of a kickoff from me. My name's Ron Schlecht, managing partner from BTB Security. Basically just going to do a little bit of a kickoff. Last week, it seemed like it was better to start on a topic and kind of get the conversation going and then allow folks to do the Q&A. So somewhat of the same topic, talking about some of the things that, or some of the issues that we're seeing from a vendor's perspective, and then we'll get into some of the Q&A portion of what we're doing here. So everyone should be able to see my slides, should be able to hear me really well. If not, please send me a message. We do see the messages and they come up right on the screen here, as well as the questions. So last week we were talking about staffing in information security and some of the issues associated with trying to staff your own security operations center, and then kind of talk through some of the challenges that we've seen in staffing from a vendor's perspective. I think everybody's kind of feeling the pain. I continue to have these conversations both with clients and colleagues and also competitors in our industry, just talking about how we change this. From our perspective, just as a little bit of a recap, we do use a lot of recruiters, and then also we have actually taken some initiative and started to fund and sponsor some of the programs associated with trying to further cybersecurity education. Things like the Cyber Patriot program, and then also some local universities and colleges that have cybersecurity teams, competition teams that they use. So today, a little bit of a different topic, very timely actually, as we're coming up on the big RSA Security Conference out in San Francisco. For anybody that may be going, you know, and you've probably been completely overwhelmed with the folks or the exhibitor floor that's at RSA. I have some things to share as we start to talk through some of that. Maybe it'll kick off the conversation, but really just wanted to talk about the kind of vendor explosion that we've seen. And even coming from a vendor, I'll kind of give you some of my viewpoints on a little bit of the frustration that we've seen and some of the things that we have to wade through. You know, going back a number of years, since we've been around for a little while, a lot of our conversation starters with CISOs or managers of security or security engineers was really just about awareness of who we are. And a lot of times we were trying to, open the door even with CIOs to justify the fact that they needed some external security help and what we were actually able to provide them. So it's changed pretty dramatically in the past in the past 13 years, going on 14 years that we've been in business. What we've seen just in the past 10 years is a massive explosion. So I think first, and this is kind of the same format as last week, I think from a practitioner standpoint or an internal, infrastructure person or CIO or CISO, you realize that you need vendors. you need them as part of your security organization for either validation, external validation of the controls that you have in place or changes that you've made or new technology implementations, or even compliance or regulatory type assessments. You also need them as far as specialized security expertise in many cases. Very large companies may be able to hire in incident response or forensics personnel, but a lot of the mid-market companies and even smaller companies really struggle with that because it's very specific expertise that there's looking for, and you have these people sitting on the bench a lot of the time, since they can't be busy doing forensic work 100% of the time. Kind of like we were talking about last week with some of the staffing problems that we've had. The vendor explosion has exacerbated that problem. So you guys need vendors, talking about infrastructure folks or internal security folks need vendors. And it's been a little bit frustrating, even from a vendor perspective. Just in the past 10 years, that little number down there, just on the statistics side, over 10,000 security companies started in the last decade. And I have that in quotes because, as we've all probably experienced at some point, just because somebody slaps security onto their service list or their name or whatever it may be, that doesn't necessarily make them the security people that you want to use. So we've seen this big explosion. It's frustrating for us as vendors because our job isn't just talking about what expertise we bring to the table and the differentiators that we have, but also helping a lot of our prospective clients and clients wade through what a good vendor relationship should be. Also kind of making this problem a little bit harder to wade through is the fact that with the explosion of security companies, whether it be software or services or hardware type solutions, we've also seen a ton of new categories or the people that are creating needs. In fact, one of the ones that internally was just sent out today at BTB Security that had a little bit of a chuckle about, if anybody's been familiar with some of the changes that the industry has seen in monitoring. We went from MSSPs to more MDR type solutions, where we actually have a service set around that. And then we have a lot of vendors that were EDR, so endpoint detection and response solutions, things like Carbon Black, CrowdStrike. Now there's a new term that's being tossed around, and I just saw a webinar coming up on it next week for XDR. Didn't really get into it too much because I was on a plane and just saw the email come through. But XDR is essentially what MDR, if I'm thinking about it, should be. So it's more holistic. It's not just about the endpoint, but then encompassing things that are typical for monitoring right now, are things that we've all kind of been used to, monitoring or logging and monitoring of servers, network devices, your typical IT infrastructure, and then also your included security infrastructure. So we continue, and I'm going to lump BTB Security and myself into that overall vendor mix. And this is what's frustrating. We continue to make these new terms and new categories that are even more confusing for folks that are trying to make those decisions. I can tell you from my perspective, it's just as frustrating from a vendor, for a vendor that's been in this space for a while, to see new offerings or new labelings of things that are essentially just a recycle of an older idea, and then something that's maybe tweaked a little bit. So I think we're definitely doing ourselves and then also our customers a disservice because there's just too much. There's too much to look at, try to understand with the vendor explosion that we've seen. So it really begs the question: what is needed to protect, respond, and comply? And it is really dependent upon what your goals are as an organization. Several people look at it and try to create an organization and then infrastructure that's really built defense in depth, but at the same time complying to regulatory or industry-based standards. So there's multiple ways to solve that problem, but I think some of the things that we talked about, or that I talked about, previously in another webinar, and actually a SANS webinar, was building out your solution set, not from the shiny new toys that you see at something like an RSA, but instead defining what your problem is or where you want to be, what your goal is. And then, I referenced actually a fishbone analysis. So if you're putting something out in front, that is the end state that you're shooting for, or the goal, working back and maybe breaking it down for people, process, and technology, and maybe even management concerns. And then kind of from that, figuring out what you need to do, because there's going to be a complementary mix of all of those things to make sure that the problem gets solved. So it's not just about the technology. What I really don't like that I've seen in the past couple years, especially coming out of a lot of these larger conferences, is the fact that people are essentially being pushed into or told that they need these solutions to solve a problem. They're essentially creating a little bit of a problem or they're creating the problem that doesn't really exist in order to sell the solutions. I'm not saying that they're bad solutions. There's a lot of great innovative stuff out there. However, I think the marketers have really taken a spin and pushed folks in the wrong direction and probably led them a little bit astray. So, I always try to take a little bit more of a pragmatic approach to security, overall security. And again, try to define what the problem is. And, when we sit down and talk to potential customers, we really get into what problem they're trying to solve, and then also what their understanding of, what we do is. So, asking those questions and getting a little bit deeper with your clients. And this is the stuff that people should be doing with you. They shouldn't just be presenting what their solution takes care of, but instead, talking through exactly the type of problems that you have, and then trying to figure out if they're the right fit or not. One of the things, and I'll send out a message here via the chat. One of the things that, it was very timely today, I didn't mean to do that, was that I saw an article published, basically just 30 security vendor behaviors that set off CISO's BS detector. And there's a couple people that have been involved in creating that I really like. And I really like the quotes that went into it and kind of how the article was written. So it's making its rounds on LinkedIn right now. I encourage everyone to take a look at it. Some of them, just to give you a little bit of a preview of it. The folks that say that there's an InfoSec cure-all, claiming absolutes. We stop all threats. We automatically detect threats. Things like that. So they go through the top 30, and the feedback is directly from, and the quotes are directly from CISOs that have been working and kind of putting up with some of the vendor BS that goes on in this industry right now. I think this is timely. I think it's a good topic to have a little bit of a discussion on and answer some questions on, because RSA, the RSA Security Conference is coming up in a couple weeks. For anybody that's been there, what a circus it does turn into. And then also, I've been doing this for over 20 years now in, cybersecurity for over 20 years now. And even myself going to that RSA conference, there's so much walking around. You're inundated with new pitches, new problems that you didn't even know that you had, if you have them. I walk out of there almost more confused, and I've been doing this for a while, just trying to understand if I'm lost in the mix and I've gotten left behind in the technology. It all changes so rapidly, and we're all kind of charged with keeping up to date. It's just one of the hardest things to do in technology, and then more specifically security. But there's a lot of time I leave RSA thinking that maybe I am very far behind. And then once I digest it a little bit more, I realized that a lot of these solutions are very point solutions. They're very specific point solutions, or trying to solve a problem that I don't really have and isn't very specific to me. Like I said before, not saying that they're not good vendors. It's just there is a lot of marketing BS and a lot of just general BS that goes along with this now, because quite honestly, that's what we've gotten into. We've allowed ourselves to kind of ramp up and be part of the circus. So with that said, I'm going to open it up to the Q&A portion. We already do have a few questions that have trickled in. I know we have a couple people on board, so feel free to go ahead on the right-hand side, open up that chat window. You can send them to me privately. You can send them through the chat to, I think, everybody. I'm not exactly sure how that's set up, but answer those questions as they come in. And just a reminder, there is one more set of these in this series. We'll kind of be talking about some specific solutions and kind of how solutions have changed in our industry and some of the frustrations that we've experienced as a vendor for security solutions. But everybody on the webinar will be entered in to win that cruise. So try to keep this as lighthearted as possible. Like I said, this is the chance for Q&A. You can talk about anything. I just tried to kick it off with some topic that I think is relevant for what we're all kind of facing now. If you guys have had a chance to read that article that I sent along, we can even discuss that if there's something in there that kind of pops out, or I can start telling stories. So one of the questions right off the bat, I guess I mentioned RSA and that's trickled this one out. How am I supposed to approach going to a large conference like RSA? I've been overwhelmed before. So, I basically just talked about this as far as being overwhelmed. And this came in before I really got done with that little spiel there. As far as how to deal with being overwhelmed, what I've tried to do in the past is, make sure that I make a list of the vendors that I want to see, either that have a technology that I may be interested in, or that, there's a defined need for. If there's a defined need within your organization for some type of governance or third-party vendor management type software or solutions, then seek those out. They're pretty good at categorizing them. The biggest trick at RSA is that they're usually scattered all over the place. They don't, necessarily try to lump them all together. There may be some of that, but at the same time, they kind of put them throughout their, 15 different football field sized conference area plots. So I would say go in with a plan, take the time to look through the vendor list, and then also, make a plan for that, but then also be a little bit open. I mean, I try to walk the floor and just, if there's something that catches my eye, stop by a booth. That's why a lot of these folks are there. They pay big money to be there. They want the interactions, and sometimes for me, it's just a matter of stopping by and kind of asking exactly what need they're trying to solve. The other big thing that I try to do at conferences to make it a little bit more, more relevant to what I do, and this is a little bit focused since I'm a vendor, is, ask a lot. Once they get to a technical state, if they stop, then I know I'm probably talking to a paid marketing person as opposed to, somebody that has an interest in either their actual sales process or the technical background of the company or the, whatever the solution may be. So, there's a couple different tactics that I mentioned there. Like I said, go in with a list, maybe the pre-qualified list of folks that you want to talk to, and then also take a stab at what your actual problems are and what you're trying to solve. Maybe working off of whatever your 1, 2 year or 3 year plan may be. And then also kind of keep an open mind and just kind of hit the folks that may strike an interest with you. Hope that answers it. That was a little bit long-winded for me, but hope that gets it. All right. So another one here, sort of more general. If you're not going to conferences, or if you're not going to conferences because they are overwhelming, what's the best way to find vendors? This is, I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe if somebody can point me to the best way for folks to find vendors, that's the golden ticket to be able to market to that or at least get in on that. I don't know. I mean, there's a bunch of good ways. I think the best way that, in my experience when I was working as a CISO, the best thing that I was able to do was networking with other folks in the industry. So, I know there are meetups, and a lot of times the Avanta events have like dinner roundtables. Then there's the CISO breakfast series or breakfast roundtable that's run throughout the country, and they have multiple chapters. I think the best part of that, even though they do have vendors that specifically sponsor those events as they're going on, I think some of the best things that come out of those events is, at least for the CISO breakfast roundtable one, and if anybody needs that information, more than happy to pass it along. I was actually part of one of the starting one of the chapters, or in one of the initial chapters, and then just kind of grew out. And then, of course, when started BTB and I became a vendor, then I was kind of kicked out. We did some sponsorship of them, but what I liked about it is that they do a topic. So it may be, I think they're doing them quarterly now, or maybe even once a month or once every 2 months. But they pick a topic like security assessments, just as an example. And even though it might be sponsored by somebody like BTB Security or another vendor, they allow the vendor to do a presentation. It can't be a sales pitch. It has to be about their methodology and how they're doing things, and what they're bringing to their clients. And then the vendor gets kicked out. So it's not like you're just in there kind of listening to a sales pitch, and then the sales folks are kind of harvesting leads. But the vendor gets kicked out, and the folks that are in that group, most of them are CISOs or security managers, security engineers. They all have security leadership or high-level engineering in their title and in their function. Sit and talk about whatever that topic may be. So they discuss it, and a lot of times you get people basically giving leads or giving references to clients or vendors that have worked well for them. Along those same lines, any sort of like InfraGard chapter, B-sides, anything like that. The big conferences are good because there's a lot of good learning that goes on, and there's a lot of good tracks. But at the same time, you can be a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of vendors there. So I would say, if you're not going to go to those big conferences, because they can be expensive, especially RSA can be very expensive, even as just being an attendee. I would say go to your local chapter events, either the CISO breakfast roundtable stuff, or going to InfraGard chapters, B-sides chapters, or just regular technology networking events, and ask the questions about the problems that you have. And I'm more than sure that people will be able to give you some good leads in finding vendors. And typically they're the people that have responded well and done good work for them. Another one that kind of came on at the heel of that is there any real value to attending? I find these shows overwhelming and a very improper forum to evaluate any solution. I agree. I mean, we've done, as BTB Security, we've actually done some of these events, but a lot of times we focus more on just awareness of the company being there and what our capabilities are. So instead of trying to do demos and really getting really deep into the weeds about how and what we do, we really talk more about just awareness that we're out there, what our capabilities are, and trying to make the connections with folks so that they have another vendor in the mix, either for assessments or response, or the managed monitoring and response. I personally find it really hard to attend. And we've kind of even scaled back a lot of these conferences that we've gone to and sponsored, because it's just overrun with vendors right now. So we always kind of make the determination, if we're going to be one vendor in a stack of vendors that you're trying to evaluate, we're doing our marketing exactly like everyone else, and it's not going to be effective. A lot of times we'll do some guerrilla marketing just to make sure that people understand that we're out there, and maybe give us a look. But to us, or for us, spending $85,000 or over $100,000 to have a booth at RSA, and then all the stuff that goes with it, It just doesn't make sense. I think it's a poor use of money for the services that we provide, and I think we get a lot better relationships out of the smaller networking events and word of mouth. One of the other ones that came in, and I'm trying to hit them all, but there's a bunch that kind of came in all at the same time. You guys have done well with that. Are there any resources that can help me leverage existing operating system tools to harden and protect my company from the bad guys before immediately looking to purchase a product? I recently came across the attack.miter.org and StigViewer, but I'm looking for more with specifics. So there are a lot, and depending upon what specific solution that you're looking for, this is something that I can definitely take offline and shoot you some resources for that. No matter what they are, if you think about sort of the full life cycle of security and kind of what we do. On the assessment side, there's a lot of free vulnerability scanners or port scanners that are out there. So looking at what you need to do to properly assess yourself, you could be doing port scanning or vulnerability scanning, and there are definitely free tools out there, and there are definitely good resources for how to carry something like that out. There's also a lot of good resources on the OS side with exactly what to do or what to be looking for in terms of hardening. So CIS frameworks or the checklists that go along with pretty much every platform are out there. A lot of the configuration management, the configuration gathering utilities that we use to do our assessments are not only built off of the CIS checklists, the Center for Internet Security checklists, but then also off of our expertise. But they're pretty intense, just to kind of go through and give you an idea based on platform exactly what needs to be done to harden the operating system. So I take a look at those. Other tools, there's definitely stuff out there to help you do logging and monitoring that could be free. But again, the big caveat with any of these free tools or checklists is that there's time and effort associated with them in doing that legwork. So they're out there, the tools are out there, but the question was really about what can I do or how can I use these things immediately before looking to purchase a product. And those are good examples of that. So if you're doing port scanning or even vulnerability scanning, you might have some capability out of those free scanners, but most of the time they're going to be limited in what they do in terms of reporting. So once you validate, that process and maybe the information that you're getting out of it and the level of security that you're then kind of ascertaining based on what your scans are doing, then you might be able to justify the need in either going out and purchasing a scanner that has better reporting capabilities, or engaging with a professional services company to actually help you do that stuff. So there's definitely stuff out there. If there's specifics that you might have, I'll give. I think everyone on here probably can look up my email address, but it's just ron.schlecht@btbsecurity.com. If you don't know how to spell Schlecht, it's actually the German word for bad. So do the quick translation, and you should be able to find it. And it's on the website too. But more than happy to go into specifics to give you lists of things that you could be looking at or tools that you could be looking at before going through and purchasing a product. But it's a good point. You kind of want to try before you buy, not only in a specific solution set, which might be hard sometimes, but just in that function. So if you've never done vulnerability scanning on your own and want to have it as part of your security organization, then obviously you want to try to get something in place and see how well you could operationalize it, what it may mean to maybe even how you're doing analytics or statistics on your security program. So let me see here. One other one. I just got what seems to be the most difficult or challenging security thing that people seem to be having a hard time with. From a vendor standpoint, or maybe a solution standpoint, the biggest thing that we see, but this may be a little bit slanted because we're looking at this type of stuff is that monitoring component. So we continue to see a lot of explosion in this space, whether it be your typical MSSP type engagement where folks already have infrastructure and they already have their technology infrastructure and even a SIM, and they just need somebody to kind of walk in and manage their deployment for them and kind of report or toss the logging over to them, or whether it's endpoint monitoring and response, such as the tool sets that are ascertained through like Carbon Black or CrowdStrike, or whether it's more of an MDR capability where it's an owned technology stack from a company. They do their implementation. The service behind it does the detection, threat monitoring, escalation, correlation, threat intelligence, and then also the response associated with that. The biggest problem that we see, and there's a lot of companies that fall into this category or that are having this problem, but we've seen it grow more in the mid-market, and then also what we'll call like small, medium-sized businesses. And I think the biggest change that we've seen here is that the large corporations have the budget and then also the staffing to be able to build these things out. So they've had something in place for a while now because they're typically regulated companies, where they have some pretty pressing industry-based standards. So they have the monitoring solutions in place. They've gone through several iterations of configurations or building them out or the implementations. So they kind of have that piece down. They also have the budgets to do the hiring and the names to do the hiring in those spaces. So most of them have that figured out. But what we've seen in the past 5 or 6 years is that those large companies also have vendors or even partners that are smaller than them. And that's where this middle market comes in, or these medium-sized and even small businesses come in. So they use these valued partners for whatever the service may be. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon how you look at it, they have to be cognizant of what these vendors or these partners are doing in their technology infrastructure. So a lot of those rules and a lot of the security, the security organization and really the framework for doing monitoring, and there's this whole third party or vendor risk management type movement that's happened over the past 5 or 6 years. That stuff gets pushed down onto those smaller companies. And the smaller companies are ending up, looking and having the same burden that the much larger companies have, but with budget constraints wrapped around it. So they may be able to pay for a solution, but they're not able to, do the implementation or outsource the implementation so that the configuration is correct. And sometimes they pick the wrong solution. Sometimes they pick the right solution, and like I said, don't configure it correctly. And sometimes you do have companies that pick the right solution, configure it correctly, and then don't have anybody to watch it. So, for us, and this is, again, very much a slanted answer because this is a lot of the stuff that we look at when we talk to folks. We see a really big need, and that's why our business has changed pretty dramatically over the past 5 or 6 years, because we see a pressing need for and the accessibility for folks to be able to consume these services, but with flexibility and at price points that are much more amenable to them. It's not something that like a Chase is. We don't deliver at the same volume. Even though we have those enterprise type relationships, we're much more suited to that middle market where that slice of technology is facing a really big problem. They don't know how to slice it. And you have a lot of people that are now in that space that need to be doing the regular assessment type work, the external assessments. They've never been assessed before, but now they're being told by a partner or one of their clients that they need to have regular penetration tests or regular assessments, or their web application or their mobile application needs to be assessed. So that's what we've seen. But again, this is from a vendor's perspective, but I think that's the biggest challenge is making sure that they're able to consume those services at a level that actually works for them, right? It's the risk reward matrix that they have to figure out, but it seems to be the biggest problem in addition to hiring, which we kind of went over last week. So there was one question. I'll kind of answer it. If there's specific questions and you guys send them in private, before you drop off, I will try to get back to them because I know there were a couple that came in that asked for a repeat, or the website that I quoted or mentioned for a specific thing. I'll get back to them, but I want to address the more general questions as we look at this stuff. So here we go. And forgive me, I'm kind of scrolling through. I wish I could hit all of these. What should I look for in a vendor relationship? I mean, I think it should be BTB security, but that's obviously a little bit more focused on I mean, a vendor relationship. It's kind of funny because I really try to help people focus on what not only the solutions that they need based on the goals that they're trying to hit, but then also the people that they're dealing with. Unfortunately, I think in our culture, specifically in the United States, customer service has gone a little bit towards the wayside, and I think it's unfortunate because IT can be so disconnected in how we talk to each other, and basically just churning through solutions, and everything can be kind of laid out very generically, and ones and zeros, or how the solution could do or might do. But I think there's a lot of vendors that have lost that customer service focus. I know for myself, that's one of the biggest factors in choosing a vendor and sticking with that vendor for us even. So, as a vendor, I look to those relationships to not only fill the need that I have for whatever the solution may be, but I also look for how they interact with us. I can tell you just from my own experience and some of the stuff that we consume. We use LinkedIn Navigator, and a lot of that is for lead generation and prospecting, and then also doing some of that outreach and nurturing of relationships that we have for prospective clients, and then also existing clients. LinkedIn has an awesome onboarding procedure for new customers. So it's not just about, your solution's in our hands now and go have fun with it and I hope it works, but they've kind of turned it so that it's a customer success manager. And I know that's a term now that's out there a little bit more as far as like project manager goes, but it really is focused on making sure that we get set up correctly, that we have a defined set of metrics about what is going to be, or what's going to show us that we're successful and they're successful in what they're providing. And then also that regular monitoring and those regular touch points. And I can't stress enough how when I interact with a vendor, how much more important that is to me than, just whether the solution fits the bill or not. They're ingrained in what we do. They want to know more about our sales process. They want to know about the other technology pieces that we use. Some of them, probably self-serving. They want to sell us more and offer more services. But that's just an example. The person that we have as far as like our account manager has taken the time to lay everything out so that it's easy for us to get implemented, but then also has kind of put the metrics out there so that we know that we're successful in what we're doing. And there's always tweaking of that. And there's things that vendor's given us, LinkedIn has given us, that has given us an outside view of what other companies are doing and how they're doing that. So I think the big thing for me as far as picking a vendor is not just, whether the solution, whether the solution actually hits the mark and can fill your need, but then also how those people interact with you. If you get somebody that just jumps on the phone and like, here's what we do, buy it or not. Even if the solution's like the best thing in the world, if that's your initial interaction with those folks when you're just talking about, when they're just talking about their solution or their service set or whatever it may be, when you really start to have a problem, you really have to think about how you're going to be handled. So I think one of the biggest things is, just that customer service aspect of it. So people really have your, best interests in mind when you're looking through their solution and what they're trying to do. If they're just jamming something down your throat, then they're really doing you a disservice. They may be selling you something that you don't need. All right. Other questions as we're kind of wrapping up. Probably take two more if we start to look through some of these. We get ones that I have a couple on here that are specific to our company. You know, I don't know. This is kind of on the same vein as, or in the same vein as, what you might look for in a vendor. There's one that says, "Do you sell hardware and software?" It's kind of not the place for us to talk about what we sell specifically, but the answer is no. We don't sell hardware or software. There's no hardware sales or software sales, even though they're security related. Strictly play on the assessment side. When we talk about vendor explosion and some of the things that we've seen, I don't know, it kind of goes back to that. There's a lot of companies that are out there that promise to be everything to everyone. Not necessarily a bad thing. You know, if you like to do the one-stop shopping, go for it. I mean, for me, I know I do my grocery shopping sometimes at Walmart, and I can get my groceries done and pick up Christmas decorations and maybe a new video game all at the same time. But you got to wonder about quality, and then also what kind of other things you're getting or how much you're paying for that type of stuff. And sometimes there are conflicts that you run into. So I don't think it's always a bad thing. I think it's very dependent upon the vendors that you use or the vendor that you use. But we don't do anything like that. We've tried to stay agnostic as far as the solutions that we look at. When we try to help clients out, it really truly is about trying to help them get a need filled, as opposed to just you need to buy a firewall. Here's the firewall we recommend. We can go through those solution sets with people, but at the same time, that's not our strong point. We don't do we don't do any implementation work. We can do product evaluations based on whatever your need or goal is, but at the same time, it's just kind of hard to do. Here's a good one. What do you think about non-US security companies doing business in the United States? I don't know. This is kind of a tough one because it used to be, and I know that there have been a couple examples of folks that are companies that have done some shady things in the past, right, or been called into question. Kaspersky was one. I think they did a fine job, even though there's a lot of bad stuff that kind of went along, or there's at least some folks that have accused them of doing some things that were a little bit shady. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. A lot of good solutions and a lot of good new ideas and innovations have come out of countries outside the United States. Obviously, you have to take into account where they're coming from and maybe what some of the precipice for doing this stuff is. But for the most part, it's a global economy, and the information security industry is no different in that respect. So when there's innovations that are coming out of Israel, or places like Romania or Asia Pacific, where wherever it may be, I think it's worth taking a look at them, just because they're going to have different challenges in their own economies, and then also technical infrastructures that we may not have. So I used to be a little bit more closed-minded about it, in all honesty, because I just thought that everything great was coming out of the United States, and I was always kind of thinking that everyone else was a little bit shady in what they were doing. But Israel's proved us wrong, and there's been a lot of good stuff coming out of multiple different countries. So I don't think it's important to just focus on US only based countries. Most of them have gone global at this point, and most of the US based companies have also looked and expanded into going globally so that they can better serve their customers. So that actually takes us right to the end. Like I said, there's a couple questions on here that I know I need to answer privately. If you guys want to stick on, if you don't want to drop off super fast, I can send you some of the stuff that's out there, or based on some of the questions that everyone had. I can start to answer some of that stuff. But otherwise, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming on to the webinar today. And again, you'll be entered into the chance to win a cruise. Just kind of wrapping it into Valentine's Day and sort of the Cupid's Q&A. So thank you all for attending. I'll answer some of the questions in private here. I'm going to turn off my mic and my webcam, but I will get to all of them. So again, thank you very much, and I hope you stop in next week for the last one in the series. Same time, I'll definitely be in a different location, just as I was last week, because I'm kind of constantly on the road with what I do. But I would welcome you to ask any questions as well. So look up or jot down my email address really quickly, ron.schlecht, it's SCHLECHT, at btbsecurity.com. And thank you very much for attending.